Easter morning, racist cops arrested 16-year-old Aidan Booker for a crime he didn't commit, but they had no idea his father was a powerful civil rights attorney ready to expose their corruption. The truth will shock you. Stay till the end. Before we jump into this powerful story, please let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from today, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories that will captivate you and leave a lasting impact. Easter morning in Brooksville was always special, a day when the entire town seemed to awaken with renewed energy. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the aroma of blooming flowers and freshly baked pastries from local shops. Families filled the streets, children darting around with baskets, giggling as they hunted for brightly colored eggs hidden in corners of lawns and parks. Yet beneath this cheerful surface, Brooksville was a town with unspoken divides, lines drawn not by fences, but by invisible forces that shaped its neighborhoods, schools, and interactions. 16-year-old Aidan Booker was a picture of innocence and determination as he left his modest home in the heart of the town's older neighborhood. His neatly pressed white shirt and blue slacks gave him a polished look, one his mother always insisted on for Sunday family gatherings. His hands held a wicker basket filled with candy and homemade treats for his younger cousins. Aidan today, like every year, promised to be a day of celebration. Or so he thought. Aidan's neighborhood, though full of life and community spirit, bore the marks of neglect. The playground he passed on his way out had rusted swings and faded slides, a stark reminder of the disparity between his part of town and the more affluent areas. But Aidan didn't dwell on it. He hummed softly to himself as he walked, nodding politely to neighbors enjoying the morning sunshine. Just a few blocks away, chaos erupted. The town's largest jewelry store, Gold & Grace, became the target of an early morning heist. Two masked individuals barged into the store, their movements swift and calculated. Security footage later revealed the scene. Shattered glass counters, terrified employees crouching behind the counter, and the thieves grabbing handfuls of diamonds and gold before bolting. Outside, a black sedan idled, engine purring as they made their getaway. Witnesses at the scene could offer little clarity. A panicked customer muttered something about a young man in a hoodie, while another swore they saw someone run toward the nearby park. The details were sketchy at best, but that didn't stop the rumors. By the time police were alerted, one description echoed louder than the rest. A young black male was involved. Within minutes, Officers Grant and Harris arrived at the scene, their patrol car screeching to a halt. Officer Grant, a seasoned cop with a reputation for his no-nonsense attitude, took charge immediately. His square jaw tightened as he surveyed the scene, his sharp eyes scanning the area for anything or anyone out of place. Grant had been on the force for over 15 years, and while he prided himself on being by the book, his actions often betrayed a different story. His partner, Officer Harris, was younger, quieter, and far less assertive. Harris had joined the force with the hope of making a positive impact, but working alongside Grant had taught him to keep his head down and follow orders. Over time, Harris had grown uneasy with some of Grant's methods, but he lacked the confidence to challenge him outright. As the officers gathered statements, Grant's focus sharpened when he heard the description of the suspect. Young black male, early 20s, wearing a hoodie. Grant's mind was already forming an image, and it wasn't long before he decided they needed to expand their search to the surrounding streets and parks. Aidan was unaware of the robbery or the chaos unfolding nearby. He continued his walk, now cutting through Willow Park, a shortcut he often took to his aunt's house. The park, though beautiful in spring, was quieter than usual, with only a few joggers and dog walkers scattered around. As he emerged from a shaded path, Aidan noticed a police car parked on the curb. He thought nothing of it at first, but then he saw Officer Grant step out, his gaze locking onto him almost instantly. Grant's eyes narrowed, studying Aidan with the intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. To Grant, Aidan fit the description too perfectly, a young black male walking alone near the scene of a crime. Harris hesitated, glancing between Grant and the boy. "Are you sure about this?" he asked under his breath, his tone cautious. Grant didn't answer. Instead, he gestured subtly for Harris to follow as they got back into their car and began trailing Aidan from a distance. Aidan, still oblivious, hummed to himself, occasionally stopping to adjust the basket in his hand. He smiled at a child who waved at him from a nearby bench and kept walking. But the police car creeping behind him was no longer a coincidence, and the next few moments would change his life forever. The squad car came to a stop just a few feet away, and Aidan turned to see two police officers stepping out. Their movements were deliberate, their expressions unreadable. Officer Grant, the taller of the two, wasted no time. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" he barked, his voice firm and commanding. Aiden froze, startled. "Me?" he asked, pointing to himself, unsure of why he was being called out. "Yes, you," Grant snapped. "Come here." Confused but compliant, Aiden approached slowly, his basket swinging gently in his hand. "Is something wrong, officer?" he asked politely, his tone calm but cautious. Grant ignored the question, his eyes scanning Aiden from head to toe. "We're investigating a robbery that just happened nearby. You match the description of one of the suspects." Aiden's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "A robbery? No, sir, I don't know anything about that. I've just been walking through the park on my way to my aunt's house." Grant stepped closer, his expression hardening. "Let me see your ID." Aiden hesitated for a moment, reaching into his pocket to retrieve his wallet. "Here," he said, handing over his school ID, the only form of identification he carried. "I'm just a high school student." Grant inspected the card, but his demeanor didn't soften. "Where were you 20 minutes ago?" Aiden swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "I was at home, sir. I just left a few minutes ago. You can ask my mom." But Grant wasn't interested in explanations. "Do you have any witnesses to back that up?" he asked sharply. Aiden opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Officer Harris interjected. "Grant, maybe we should—" Grant shot him a look that silenced him immediately. Turning back to Aiden, Grant said, "Empty your pockets." "Why?" Aiden asked, his confusion turning into frustration. "I haven't done anything wrong." "That wasn't a request," Grant said, his tone icy. Aiden hesitated, then reluctantly complied, pulling out a few crumpled bills, some gum, and his phone. "See, nothing. Can I go now?" But Grant wasn't convinced. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "What?" Aiden exclaimed, his voice rising. "You're arresting me? For what?" "You're being detained for questioning," Grant replied curtly, pulling out his handcuffs. The metallic click of the handcuffs felt like a thunderclap in Aiden's ears. His heart raced as he stood frozen, the cuffs tight around his wrists. "This is a mistake," he protested. "I didn't do anything." A small group of people in the park began to take notice. Among them was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who often sat on a bench near the entrance to feed the birds. She knew Aiden well. He often helped her carry her groceries when she needed it. "What's going on here?" she called out, her frail voice cutting through the tension. She shuffled closer, her cane tapping against the pavement. "That's Aiden Booker. I've known that boy since he was a baby. He's no criminal." Grant barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, please step back. This doesn't concern you." Mrs. Jenkins wasn't deterred. "It does concern me. That boy is innocent. I can vouch for him. He's on his way to his aunt's house, for heaven's sake." The crowd grew larger as more people stopped to see what was happening. A young woman pulled out her phone and began recording, the red light blinking ominously as she captured every word. "You're making a mistake," Aiden pleaded again. "This isn't right." Grant ignored him, gripping his arm to lead him toward the patrol car. Harris looked increasingly uncomfortable, glancing nervously at the growing crowd. "Maybe we should take a minute to—" Harris started, but Grant cut him off. "Stick to protocol," Grant said through gritted teeth, his grip tightening on Aiden. Mrs. Jenkins raised her voice, addressing the crowd. "They're arresting this boy for no reason. Someone call his family." As Aiden was led to the car, the sound of hurried footsteps approached from the distance. "Wait! What are you doing to my nephew?" It was Aiden's Aunt Monica, her voice filled with panic. She had been on her way to meet Aiden at her house when she noticed the commotion in the park. Monica rushed to the scene, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Aiden, are you okay?" she asked, trying to get closer. "Ma'am, please step back," Grant said, blocking her path. "No, I will not step back," Monica shot back. "That's my nephew, and you have no right to treat him like this." "One matches the description of a suspect in a robbery," Grant said flatly. "We're taking him in for questioning." "This is ridiculous," Monica exclaimed. "He's just a kid. You can't treat him like this. You'll be hearing from his father." Grant's expression faltered for a moment. "Who's his father?" he asked, though his tone was dismissive. "You'll find out soon enough," Monica snapped, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. She turned to the crowd. "Does anyone have a phone? I need to call his father." The young woman recording the scene stepped forward. "I've one," she said, handing it over. The car pulled away, leaving Monica and the crowd standing in stunned silence. "They have no idea who they're messing with," Monica whispered to herself. At the elegant sunlit ballroom of the Brooksville Civic Center, the Easter Charity Gala was in full swing. The room buzzed with the laughter of donors and community leaders clinking glasses, while children dressed in pastel colors darted between tables collecting candy. Eustace Booker, tall and composed in his dark tailored suit, stood near the podium, engaged in a quiet conversation with a prominent community leader about upcoming reforms for juvenile justice. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. At first, Eustace ignored it, focused on the conversation, but the phone vibrated again, its persistence cutting through the ambient noise. Picking it up, Eustace saw a strange number flash across the screen. The urgency in her voice when he answered immediately put him on edge. "Deltas," Monica's voice trembled. "They've arrested Aiden. He's at the precinct. You have to get there, now." Eustace froze for a split second, his jaw tightening. "Arrested? For what?" "They're saying he was involved in some robbery, but Eustace, it's not true. He's just a kid. Grant's the one who arrested him. He wouldn't even listen to the witnesses who tried to defend him." Eustace took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I'm on my way. Stay calm, Monica. I'll handle this." His voice was controlled, yet there was an undertone of resolve that spoke volume. Ending the call, Justice excused himself from the conversation and quickly left the gala. As he walked through the room, people turned, sensing his abrupt departure. His assistant followed behind him, trying to keep up. "Cancel my remaining appointments," Justice instructed. The Brooksville Police Department was a stark gray building that loomed at the edge of town. Eustace stepped out of his car, his stride purposeful as he approached the front desk. The officer behind the counter, a young man with a nervous demeanor, glanced up and hesitated. "I'm here to see Aiden Booker," Justice stated firmly. "He's being held here." The officer stammered. "You'll need to speak to the arresting officer, sir. One moment." Before the officer could leave, Justice added, "And bring the precinct supervisor. I have some questions." Moments later, Officer Grant appeared, his expression guarded. "And who are you?" "I'm Eustace Booker, Aiden Booker's father," Eustace replied evenly. "I'd like to know why my son has been arrested." Grant crossed his arms. "Your son matches the description of a suspect involved in a robbery. We're questioning him as part of an investigation." Eustace studied Grant with a sharp gaze that seemed to pierce right through him. "Matches the description? A vague description that conveniently aligns with my son's race, I assume." "Look, Mr. Booker." "Tepernut Booker," Justice corrected, his voice calm but firm. "And I'll remind you, Officer Grant, that detaining someone without evidence is a violation of their rights. Where's your supervisor?" Before Grant could respond, Sergeant Parker, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, walked in. "What's going on here?" he asked, eyeing the tension between Eustace and Grant. Eustace turned to Parker. "Your officer has arrested my son without cause. I want to see him, and I want to see him now." Parker hesitated, glancing at Grant. "He's being questioned." "But without legal representation, he's not," Justice interrupted. "You can either show me to my son, or I can file an emergency motion with the court and have your department under review before the day is out. Your choice." Reluctantly, Parker gestured for Eustace to follow. "This way." The holding area was stark and cold, with gray walls and a single metal bench bolted to the floor. Aiden sat there, his head lowered, his shoulders tense. When Eustace walked in, Aiden looked up, and the relief in his eyes was palpable. "Dad," Aiden said, his voice breaking slightly. Eustace crossed the room in a few strides and sat beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I'm here now, son. You're going to be okay." "They think I did it, Dad," Aiden said, his voice trembling. "They wouldn't listen to me. I told them I was just walking to Aunt Monica's house, but they didn't care." "Tell me everything," Eustace said calmly. "Start from the beginning." Aiden recounted the events of the morning, the moment the officers stopped him, their accusations, and how they dismissed Mrs. Jenkins and the others who tried to defend him. "They didn't even give me a chance to explain," Aiden said, his frustration evident. Eustace listened intently, his expression unreadable but his mind racing. When Aiden finished, Eustace leaned forward slightly. "Aiden, listen to me. None of this is your fault. They made a mistake, a big one, and I'm going to make sure they're held accountable." "But what if they don't believe me?" Aiden asked, his voice small. "They don't have to believe you," Eustace replied. "The facts will speak for themselves, and trust me, I know how to make them listen." Eustace stood and turned to Parker, who had been lingering near the door. "I need a full report of the arrest," Eustace demanded. "And I want to see any evidence you have that links my son to this crime." Parker hesitated. "We're still compiling everything." "I shouldn't have detained him," Justice cut in sharply. "You're holding an innocent minor without probable cause. That alone is a violation of his rights." Grant, who had joined them in the hallway, stepped forward. "We're following procedure." "Your procedure is flawed," Justice shot back. "And if you think this ends here, you're sorely mistaken." Turning back to Aiden, Eustace softened his tone. "I need you to stay strong, son. We'll fight this together." Aiden nodded, his faith in his father giving him a renewed sense of hope. As Justice prepared to leave the room, he looked over his shoulder at Grant and Parker. "I suggest you start preparing your defense, because this department is about to face a very public reckoning." News of Aiden's arrest spread quickly, first among neighbors and then across the town. By the end of the day, whispers of the incident had become a roar. People in Aiden's community, who had long felt the weight of unfair treatment, were furious. Aiden was a good kid. Everyone knew that. The thought of him being treated like a criminal was too much to bear. In the heart of the neighborhood, Kimberly Lopez, a young and determined local journalist, was gathering information for her online news channel. Armed with her camera and notebook, Kimberly knocked on doors, spoke to witnesses, and pieced together what had happened in the park. Her most impactful interview was with Mrs. Jenkins, whose fiery defense of Aiden at the scene had made her a central figure in the story. Sitting on her small porch, with her gray curls framing her face, Mrs. Jenkins didn't hold back. "I've known Aiden since he was in diapers," she said, her voice trembling with both anger and emotion. "That boy wouldn't harm a fly. Those officers didn't want to listen. They just wanted someone to blame." The video of Mrs. Jenkins' heartfelt testimony was uploaded later that evening and quickly went viral. Her words resonated deeply, with viewers commenting and sharing their own experiences with unfair treatment. Within hours, hashtags like "Justice for Aiden" and "End Racial Profiling" began trending on social media platforms. At the heart of the movement were Aiden's friends and family, who rallied the community to organize a peaceful protest outside the police precinct. They held signs that read, "Justice for Aiden and Protect Our Youth." The crowd grew larger by the day, drawing attention from regional media outlets. The once quiet Brooksville was now the epicenter of a heated debate about justice, race, and accountability. Inside the precinct, the growing public backlash was causing tension among the officers. Officer Harris, who had been uneasy about Aiden's arrest from the start, finally confronted Officer Grant in the break room. "Grant," Harris began, his tone low but firm, "we need to talk about what happened with the Booker kid." Grant leaned back in his chair, his expression indifferent. "What about it?" "You know that arrest wasn't right," Harris said, his voice rising slightly. "The kid didn't do anything. He didn't even match the description all that well." Grant scoffed. "Don't be naive, Harris. Do you know how many times we've let people walk because we didn't act fast enough? Sometimes you have to trust your instinct." "Your instincts," Harris shot back. "This isn't about instincts. This is about targeting someone because they look a certain way." Grant's face darkened. "You're getting soft, Harris. If you can't handle the heat, maybe you should find a desk job." Harris clenched his fists, his frustration evident. He had joined the force to make a difference, but moments like this made him question whether he was on the right side. He stormed out of the room, leaving Grant behind, unfazed. In the shadows of the precinct's bureaucracy, Detective Ramirez, an internal affairs officer, was quietly observing the situation. Ramirez had been building a case against Grant for months. Grant's complaints about his behavior, ranging from unwarranted stops to excessive force, had piled up, but none had gained enough traction to warrant serious consequences. When Ramirez heard about Aiden's arrest, she knew this could be the case that finally exposed Grant's misconduct. She reviewed the footage of the arrest that had leaked online, her sharp eyes noting every unnecessary action, every dismissive gesture. It was damning evidence, but Ramirez wanted more. That evening, Ramirez visited Justice Booker at his office. "Mr. Booker," she said, introducing herself, "I'm Detective Ramirez with Internal Affairs. I believe we share a common goal." Eustace regarded her carefully, then gestured for her to sit. "You've been watching Grant, haven't you?" Ramirez nodded. "I have. And I believe Aiden's case could be the tipping point. With your help, we can uncover the full extent of his misconduct." The two discussed their next steps, forming an unlikely alliance. Ramirez promised to provide internal documents and evidence that could strengthen Eustace's legal battle, while Eustace agreed to keep her role confidential, for now. Back at the precinct, Grant was reviewing reports when his phone buzzed. A message had been sent to all officers in the department, a warning that footage of Aiden's arrest had leaked online. Grant's jaw tightened as he clicked the link. The video, filmed by a bystander, clearly showed his aggressive behavior and dismissive attitude toward witnesses like Mrs. Jenkins. The comments beneath the video were brutal, calling for his resignation and demanding accountability. "Damn it," Grant muttered under his breath. The next morning, Justice Booker held a press conference outside the courthouse. With the leaked footage playing on a screen behind him, Justice addressed the crowd. "This is the reality of what happened to my son," he said, his voice steady but impassioned. "And it's a reality that too many families have faced. This is not just about Aiden. This is about every unjust arrest, every misuse of power, and every voice that has been ignored. We will not stop until justice is served." As Eustace stepped away from the podium, the crowd erupted into cheers. Behind the scenes, Detective Ramirez sent him a discreet message. "More evidence is coming your way. Let's finish this." The stage was now set for a battle that would expose not just Officer Grant, but the entire system that had allowed him to act without consequence for so long. Days after Aiden's arrest, Justice Booker was deep into his investigation, leaving no stone unturned. The leaked footage of Aiden's arrest had created a firestorm of outrage, but Justice knew it wasn't enough to clear his son's name. He needed solid proof of Aiden's innocence, and evidence that the police had jumped to conclusions. Through his network of contacts, Justice heard about Raymond Scott, a security guard who worked at a building near the jewelry store. Raymond had been on duty the morning of the robbery and had reportedly seen the actual suspects fleeing the scene. Justice wasted no time tracking him down. When Justice found Raymond, the man was hesitant to talk. "I tried telling the officers what I saw, but they didn't want to hear it," Raymond explained. "They said they already had a suspect." Justice leaned forward, his voice calm but insistent. "Raymond, the truth matters. My son is facing charges for something he didn't do. If you have information that can help, I need you to share it." Raymond sighed, then nodded. "All right. I saw two men run out of the store, both wearing masks. They got into a black sedan and sped off. One of them dropped something, a watch, I think, but by the time I tried to tell the officers, they were too busy with their own suspect." Eustace recorded Raymond's statement, ensuring every detail was documented. With this new testimony, he began to feel the scales tipping in his favor. Meanwhile, Detective Ramirez continued her quiet investigation into Officer Grant. The more she dug, the darker the picture became. She uncovered old complaints from citizens who claimed Grant had fabricated evidence to secure arrests. Some of these cases had resulted in convictions, others in dismissed charges, but all shared a disturbing pattern. Ramirez's most damning discovery came from internal records. She found documents showing that Grant had altered arrest reports to make his cases appear stronger. One file even included evidence that Grant had planted a small bag of drugs on a suspect during a traffic stop, a case that had led to a wrongful conviction. Ramirez met Eustace in a discreet location to share her findings. "This is enough to blow his career apart," Ramirez said, handing over copies of the documents. "But it's bigger than Grant. Someone in the department has been covering for him." Eustace raised an eyebrow. "You're saying this goes higher up?" Ramirez nodded. "Grant has ties to Commander Henson. They go way back. Henson's been protecting him for years, pulling strings to keep him out of trouble." The revelation added another layer of complexity to the case. Eustace realized that exposing this corruption would require more than just clearing Aiden's name. It would mean taking on an entire system designed to shield its own. Eustace dug deeper into the connection between Grant and Commander Henson. Through old newspaper clippings and internal documents provided by Ramirez, he pieced together their history. The two men had started their careers in the same precinct, rising through the ranks together. Henson's influence had shielded Grant from multiple internal investigations, ensuring complaints against him never gained traction. As Justice continued building his case, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The owner of the jewelry store, Mr. Patel, had initially been hesitant to get involved, but after seeing the public outcry and the leaked footage of Aiden's arrest, he decided to review his store's security cameras more thoroughly. To his shock, the footage revealed a clear view of the real suspects. The two masked men could be seen fleeing the store, neither of whom resembled Aiden. Mr. Patel immediately contacted Eustace, providing him with a copy of the video. When Eustace reviewed the footage, a triumphant smile spread across his face. "This is it," he said to himself. "This is the proof we needed." With the video footage, Raymond's testimony, and Ramirez's evidence of Grant's corruption, Justice knew he had a strong case. But he wasn't content with just clearing Aiden's name. He wanted accountability for everyone involved. Standing outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and supporters, Eustace made a bold announcement. "Today, we are filing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the Brooksville Police Department. This isn't just about compensation, it's about justice. We are also demanding a full investigation into their practices, starting with Officer Grant and his enabler." As Eustace spoke, inside the precinct, Grant sat at his desk, fuming. His phone buzzed with a text message from Commander Henson. "We need to talk. Now." The fallout from Justice Booker's lawsuit sent shockwaves through the Brooksville Police Department. The public outcry, fueled by damning evidence and relentless media coverage, left the department with no choice but to take swift action. Aiden was released. Officer Grant was suspended immediately, pending an internal investigation. As more of his past misconduct came to light, including fabricated evidence and questionable arrests, the department announced his termination. But it didn't end there. Grant faced criminal charges for misconduct and tampering with evidence, marking the beginning of a long legal battle. The department, eager to salvage its reputation, implemented a series of reforms. These included mandatory bias training for all officers, the installation of body cameras, and the establishment of a civilian oversight board to review complaints against officers. Sergeant Parker, who had been complicit in turning a blind eye to Grant's actions, was demoted, while others who had enabled Grant were quietly removed from their positions. The reforms were met with cautious optimism from the community. While many were pleased to see accountability, others remained skeptical, knowing that systemic change would take time. Eustace, however, saw the reforms as a victory, one step in the right direction. Meanwhile, Aiden was struggling to process what had happened. At home, he avoided his usual routines, opting instead to stay in his room with the blinds drawn. The once energetic teenager was now quiet and withdrawn, haunted by the memory of being handcuffed and led away like a criminal. His younger sister Maya noticed the change immediately. Maya was only 12, but she had a wisdom beyond her years. One evening she knocked softly on Aiden's door before peeking inside. "Aiden," she said, holding a tray with a sandwich and a glass of juice. "I made you something." "I'm not hungry," Aiden muttered, staring at the wall. Maya set the tray on his desk and sat beside him on the bed. "You know, you're my hero," she said quietly. Aiden turned to her, his eyes red. "How can I be anyone's hero after what happened?" "Because you didn't let them break you," Maya replied. "You didn't do anything wrong, Aiden. You're still my big brother, and you're still the smartest, kindest person I know." Her words brought a small, fleeting smile to Aiden's face. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. The trauma of his arrest lingered, manifesting in nightmares and a newfound distrust of authority figures. At his father's insistence, Aiden began attending therapy sessions to process his emotions and regain his confidence. During one session, his therapist asked, "What do you want to do with what happened to you, Aiden? How do you want to move forward?" Aiden thought for a moment before replying, "I want to make sure no one else has to go through this." Inspired by this resolve, Aiden started a community initiative called Youth Justice Now, aimed at educating young people about their rights when dealing with law enforcement. He partnered with local schools, hosting workshops where he shared his story and provided practical advice on how to handle police interactions safely. The initiative gained traction quickly, with parents and students praising Aiden's courage and leadership. Maya, his younger sister, often joined him at these events, handing out pamphlets and offering words of encouragement to other kids. For Aiden, seeing the impact of his work helped him find purpose and begin to heal. The lawsuit settlement was substantial, but for Eustace it was never about the money. He used the funds to establish the Booker Justice Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to fighting for victims of wrongful arrests and police misconduct. The foundation also provided scholarships to underprivileged youth, giving them opportunities to pursue careers in law, social justice, and community service. Eustace became a prominent figure in the national conversation about police reform. He appeared on talk shows and panels, advocating for systemic changes and sharing Aiden's story as a testament to the resilience of ordinary people in the face of injustice. His voice became a beacon of hope for families across the country, who had faced similar struggles. Despite his busy schedule, Justice always prioritized his family. He made sure to spend quality time with Aiden and Maya, often reminding them that their strength as a family was what had carried them through the ordeal. "This wasn't just a win for us," he told them one evening. "It was a win for everyone who believed in justice." A year after the arrest, on the following Easter, the Booker family gathered at their church for the morning service. The atmosphere was joyful, filled with the sound of hymns and the laughter of children running around with Easter baskets. Aiden stood near the front pew, greeting neighbors and friends who had come to support him over the past year. As the service began, the pastor delivered a sermon on resilience and justice, drawing parallels to the trials faced by the Booker family. "We are reminded today," he said, his voice echoing through the sanctuary, "that even in the darkest moments light prevails when we stand together." After the service, the family gathered outside for a photo. Monica, standing beside Aiden and Justus, pulled them both into a tight hug. Maya, holding an Easter basket, smiled brightly at the camera, her youthful energy a reminder of hope and renewal. As the family began to walk home, Aiden looked around at the familiar faces of his community. He no longer felt defined by what had happened to him. Instead, he felt empowered by the change he had helped create. The story closed with Aiden's voice reflecting on the past year. "I used to think justice was something you waited for," he said. "But now I know it's something you fight for. And when you fight with the right people by your side, you can change the world."